Okay. Well, Jim, as you know, we took last week off because you were traveling around Europe, and I want to talk to you about that. That sounds like a really fascinating trip on so many levels. But I
Mhm.
think as it pertains to the Imperfect Men's Club and our wheel, um, I would like to kind of segue in because I think the wheel has five components. Jim, can you share those five components with us again?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And look forward to sharing my experience over the last 22 days in Europe, but just returned last night, so it's fresh and look forward to discussing that with you. But yeah, the wheel consists of these five areas that we've identified. That's part of every one of our lives, but particularly for us, that's what we call it the Imperfect Men's Club because it's for men typically in their mid-age, mid point in life. And these five areas start with our health, which of course is so important, our mental health, our physical health, our careers, our profession, whether we're employees or managers of a large company or entrepreneurs like we are now. Money is a big part of our life, and we break that into two areas that we live in abundance or scarcity, and then people, and that's our relationship with others, and we break that into two areas, and that's man and woman because it is a different relationship that we have
Yep.
with
Yep.
with ourselves, and particularly the different dynamics between our mothers, fathers, and so on, brothers,
Yeah.
sisters,
The
and then our last one just is worldview, which
yep.
is what I think we're going to lead in today because I have this perspective of traveling to these 6, 7 different countries, and we break that up into politics and our childhood, which
Yep.
could be also seen as our spirituality and our heritage and so on. So
Yeah, I think that the notion that, in the middle of that circle, those things are surrounding this middle of the circle, which is the self, right? The ego,
yep.
self-awareness, self-accountability. And
Mhm.
I really like the foundational idea that life is a circle, a series of concentric circles, and all of these topics impact us in very different ways. But the worldview thing came up as we were talking, and I was reflecting on my time in Europe, my most significant time, it was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And we were talking about how things have changed, whether we've changed or whether other countries have changed. Obviously, all of the above, right? And you
Mhm.
throw technology and innovation in there, and it's like communication, access to information. You probably don't even need to speak another language now. You
Mhm.
can translate through a device if you wanted to, So there's so many different things. And I was curious, and then what we ended up there before we hit record was, you know, is this globalization what's going on, and looking at the world as a global entity as opposed to independent countries, and the implications of that as it pertains to things like freedom of speech and who's in charge and who do we listen to, who's the authority on what, and then borders. I mean,
Mhm.
if we're
Mhm.
global, are borders now unnecessary? And as you well know, as all of us know, we got a lot of stuff going on in our country right now, and much of it I'm questioning with a level of significance, and we don't have to polish that apple up. We can be as rude as we want to about that. But let's get into the worldview thing. Your experience in the 6 or 7 countries you went to? It sounds to me like modernization obviously has occurred, that the inconvenience that we used to experience going into other countries with, getting ice for your water and the height of things and access to things and convenience, those boundaries sound like they maybe have fallen down. They don't exist anymore. What was your experience with that, Jim?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Let's talk about myths, right? There's myths and maybe past experiences that have been pushed on, truthful or not. But I think on the worldview issue, culturally, how different those countries are, and until you spend enough time, and this was pretty extensive because I was primarily in France, Italy. That was the majority of the time, even though it was in a few other countries, Switzerland particularly. I think I mentioned that on the last episode. Switzerland, without question, is the epitome of of order and civilization. I don't care what anybody says. It's like a Swiss wasp. It stands on its own.
Mm.
And there's a reason why, but that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't even want to get into that story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my takeaway as far as cultural, um, when in comparison to being American, say being French or being Italian, I think we forget that Europe has always been at war. There's always been conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's been war on their land, and wars lost and won. So I think culturally, that's very much part of the European way,
Mm-hmm.
news and how the interactions and that. We've really never had a war on our land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And our wars, yeah, it's just different. But politically, I think if I was to reflect on it, our two system party, Democrat and Republican, it's just not serving us well. You know, we're being laughed at to some degree. Because we're constantly fighting with one another. When at one point I think we were in a much better position to lead, and now we seems like all we do is fight internally, and that's kind of sad to see. I don't think they look at America like they did. I think that's
Yeah, I don't think
that's
there's
worn
any
off.
question. I mean, I don't have a recent European experience, but I think that from the news that I watch,
Yeah,
from the information that I have access to, that we all have access to, let's be frank. I mean, the guy that was in office last, Trump, say what you want about the guy, he exuded strength,
he
and
did, but they laughed about him too.
that's okay. They laughed,
And
but they didn't do anything about it. They laughed,
I
right?
agree.
They made fun, and
Yeah,
now you have a border issue. You have, look what's going on in Israel right now. You've got
yeah,
the economy. I mean, it's weakness everywhere, and
yeah.
I think the way I see it is it's we're faking compassion, right? It's not compassionate to be weak, and it's not compassionate to say everything's okay. People can do whatever they want. That's
Mhm.
called anarchy,
Yeah.
So it is interesting. What do you have specific instances about talking with people over there about
No,
how they're
I kept it light. It
yeah.
really, we didn't get any deep political conversations. I would just say that I'm referring to the French primarily. I could not say uh, more positive things about the French in general, how they were courteous, kind, accommodating, and the quality of the people and the quality of the food was in many cases superior to the US. That's all
Yeah.
I can tell you. And not superly expensive. And I mean from a culture, because I mean I was in four different areas for multiple days, right? So it was south of France all the way up into Paris. Did the U from the top um, down to Nice and then all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think they had more of a balance of life. And even some of these small towns and uh, not necessarily small towns, they were 40,000 people or so, but there was just seemed to be some harmony that I remember we had at one. I'm speaking for the Bay Area right now, that we had kind of back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
There was
when we were growing up, I think that's the part of this. I don't know what you could attribute it to, but it seems like what I hear you say is that they have preserved the tradition of being civil and kind and courteous, and they're not grinding and running 100 miles an hour all the time. They step back and they
yeah,
enjoy their
Mark,
meat.
you said that better than I could say. That is exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
And also I felt very safe, which is interesting. I'm not one of those persons who walks around scared all the time, but I
yeah,
noticed the difference. There's not this tense intensity. There's not this level of almost anger and conflict all the time.
yeah.
And you don't realize it's there until it's not there.
Yeah, but
And
what do you
that's
think?
what I found very,
Yeah,
very, very interesting. It took a few weeks before that really started to kick in. And when you walk down the street, you didn't feel this threat all the time.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
I'm not a guy that walks around scared either. But I also think, and we've talked about this before, I think that my day-to-day life is pretty graceful and pretty simple and pretty it's not I don't it's not grindy, it's not angry, and the people that I encounter, like I was just at the supermarket getting some eggs because I didn't have anything to eat this morning, and everyone's smiling, Very few
Yeah.
people say hello. They open the door. I think the media really does a bad job of portraying what
Yeah.
reality actually is. And maybe
Yeah.
that's true everywhere. I don't know. Because, people like tragedy attracts eyes and advertisers, I guess.
No, I do think there's areas that you can feel that there is a group of people that there's a it's a level of how you describe it. It's like referring to as intensity, but it's just a more violent culture. We're a very violent culture, whether we are aware of it or not.
You know what? We
Compared,
are more than other countries, I think, and maybe not all other countries, but most. And I remember this from a conversation with my former brother-in-law, who I still maintain a very good relationship with. We're very competitive, and I and
yes,
I and I don't.
competitive that comes off as combative, but
Yeah, I
is
mean, we have this culture of professional sports, and
yeah.
you and we didn't play
Well,
well.
we have of individualism sports
Yep,
that's the
yep.
big difference. I was there for the
Yeah.
World Cup, so yeah, there's the difference too. That's a sport where you're from the day you start playing, the game comes first. And your ultimate goal is to represent your country.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of patriotism, of representing your country and being French and being Italian and being Swiss and being that. And I don't, you just don't see that the same way in the US anymore. And that's kind of sad. So I missed that. I also think these little things like their day is different, right? They
Mhm.
don't open up early. First of all, it's true pretty much throughout Europe. Your day starts, unlike America, where your day starts in the morning early and then ends somewhat early, and that's it. In Europe, they don't even really get going till 9 p.m. Right? The restaurants don't even start opening until
I
7,
know, I know. I remember that.
and it's
I
still
remember that.
like that.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the day, yeah, they shut their shops down for a period of time to go and do whatever they do, and then they reopen back up, and that's culturally accepted. So at first you're like, that's crazy. I don't have any, I can't find somewhere to eat, or I can't find nothing's open to shop. Then you just adapt to it, and it extends your day out. So you're not on the 9 to 5 clock Monday through Friday. You feel like you have a longer day because the day isn't over at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Like even now here in the Bay Area, used to be pretty common to go have dinner at, I don't know, 8 or 9 o'clock. Now everything's closed by 9 o'clock. Everything's
Yeah.
closed, and
Yeah, I
there
remember.
everything opens up. So it does something to your day. Now, this also proves why they're not as productive, right? They don't work as much as we do. But
Well,
but what's wrong with that to some degree? So
yeah, I think there's definitely a way to work smarter than we traditionally work. I still am embedded in my DNA is if I'm not working by 8 o'clock or so, I feel like I'm not getting the job done. And if I cut
yeah,
back before 5 or 6, I feel guilty. I don't always act on the guilt, but I feel guilty. And I remember my daughter, my eldest daughter, when we were eating a meal, because they come back to visit just like yours. You don't see them as often as we used to. You see them every
yeah,
few months or every couple of years, maybe.
yeah,
And so when they come back, it's daddy time. It's
yeah,
we want some daddy time, and I want some daughter time. I want some kid time. And I remember one time in particular, we were sitting down to eat, and I eat fast. That's probably an American thing too. And because my father ate fast, and because I grew up with a bunch of brothers, and if you didn't eat fast, you didn't get enough food. So it's like
yeah.
that's stuck in my DNA too. But she said to me, I said, okay, we ready to go? And she's like, Dad, how about we linger? How about we
Yeah, that
linger?
they
Right.
do. The Europeans do that a lot better than us.
Yeah, they sure do. They sure do. And
Yeah.
it's and they don't eat. They don't eat for sustenance. They eat for the experience. Right.
Well, I don't think they eat as often, and when they do, like you said, it's entertainment. It's not uncommon to see people sitting out in front of coffee shops in the middle of the day drinking. They're not excessive, so they have a glass of wine, and they'll have an espresso or a croissant or whatever, maybe in the morning, and then by the afternoon they'll have 1 or 2 beers, and that turns into dinner. But that's part of the culture. It's who they are,
You
and
know.
and they
You,
socialize. Mark, that's the biggest difference.
yeah.
The difference is people are constantly interacting. You don't see people eating by themselves. It's not a fast food mentality. And there's a McDonald's there, there's a Burger King there. Occasionally you'll see one, but
Yeah.
in general, people are there to enjoy each other's company. and that's what they do. And
What?
Italy's the same way. So I'm speaking to the majority of Europe, but for France and Italy particularly, that is who they are, and their meals, they're prepared. They think of food differently. It's not just to eat. It's an
No,
experience.
it's an art and it's an experience.
Yeah,
No, there's no question about it.
yeah,
I really miss as our world over here has evolved. Some ways good, most ways I don't like, and most of the stuff I don't like is really falls into the category of that. What happened to that tradition? What happened to that? We used to do more of these things. So like when you and I were growing up, we sat down at the table for dinner as a family virtually every evening at 6 o'clock. And I don't know that anybody that does that anymore. That's just one example. But I
yeah.
think that the work ethic, the 9 to 5, the grind, the pressure, the competition, the capitalism, and I love capitalism, but there's just I wonder if borders falling down is pushing the loss of tradition.
Yeah, but
I
before
want
we go down that road, you know what I would put more of it to is corporations have taken over just about every downtown and every street corner in America, right? So everything is so driven by large corporations. That's why you'll see a Starbucks and a Taco Bell and then a Burger King and a Target, whatever. And there's some of that there, but not like here. So
no.
I think if I was to put my finger on one area, small businesses thriving there still. These independent, small operated shop owners. And it's not that they don't have turnover. You can see their families and their people, young entrepreneurs. But when there is 50 businesses within sometimes a 100-yard circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're competing for your business, and the shop owners are interacting with their customers, and it's about putting a good product out there and getting return customers,
But also enjoying that experience of
yeah,
purchasing a fine item and
that's
and
right.
the craftsmanship of
Yeah.
things. And yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job of making the small business no longer much of a viable option over here. And that's happened pretty fast. And
It did. It has.
interesting observation on your part. Yeah.
Yeah, and real estate, right? So when you have companies that, let's face it, what one property owner can own a whole corner, a whole block, or a whole
Mm-hmm.
shopping center,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard for those businesses to thrive in this country. So that's why you end up with chains or large corporations, because small businesses, if we don't figure out a way to truly support small businesses, then I think we'll just continue to lose. Our culture will be the fast food culture, and that'll be the McDonald's and the Taco Bells and the Targets, and that's what we'll be. It's kind of what we have become in most places.
Well, you throw COVID and the shutdowns on top of lockdowns on top of all that, that
Yeah,
certainly just accelerated that process, and I think there's
yeah.
so many things ahead of us. I want to go back to this idea of tradition. I mean, it seems to me, just listening to you, that might have been one of the things that you were most impressed by or most appreciative of, is these unique traditions. They're commonalities. You just mentioned a bunch of commonalities, right? They're relaxed a little bit more. They're not grinding 9 to 5 on everything. They're not necessarily as competitive all the time. They seem to be able to step on the pitch or the court or the field and be very competitive. And then when the game's over, they go back to a more relaxing existence. And you can tell also when you cross the border from one country to another, you can tell it's not necessarily a difficult thing to do, but you can tell. And so I think protecting those patriotic things, like I think patriotism over here has kind of become has a negative connotation. And gosh, I really can't stand that. But all these countries have traditions. All these countries are proud of who they are and where they're from and what their traditions are. And I think that preserving tradition might be a good way to push the envelope on helping those small businesses, bring back those small businesses, because we got a lot of work to do. A lot of stuff's broken down over here,
Well, here's some couple of observations. I think you have, it's unfair to extrapolate from one thing to another in general, but particularly countries, because they're starting points, right?
Hmm.
So here's just some facts to start off with. Those areas were built over the last what, 500-600 years. So
Hmm.
you when you're, let's just say, driving, just about every single town has a roundabout.
Hmm.
They don't have street corners. Do you know why the difference is? Well, there's a lot of differences. First of all, there's evolution from horse and carts, to cars, but there was a commercial advantage not to have a roundabout. You wanted four corners, so you had either a gas station or some kind of a building, and
Wow.
you had an industry of signal lights at that time that was building out these cities. So there's one example, right? These cities have evolved over time, and they've been able to maintain some of their original characteristics, and but also lifestyles. So there's little things like that we forget about. The other thing is a lot of young people out, which was also kind of sobering to think about. Like particularly where I live, it's expensive. So when you go out, you see a lot of older people out dining, older people like 40s, 50s, 60s,
Hmm.
maybe even 70s and 80s, because that's who can afford, but not young people can't afford to dine out. And that's become very apparent. There you have a lot of young people out just enjoying it, but they also don't have to pay for a car. Sure, they have real estate problems. Realty is very expensive for them as well. They're sure challenged like the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Um, but when you don't have to have a car, because why would you own a car? There's no reason to, right? You have a subway system that can get you from point A to point B much more efficiently. Um, your money's not all your money's not going to some of these conveniences that we take for granted. It's nice to have our freedom and our independence of living in a larger home without and a car to drive from point A to point B.
Hmm.
Those are much smaller condensed areas. So I don't think it's fair to compare exactly, um, because these things happen over time. But I think again the conclusion is we've been so isolated. That was what America was: the individualism and being independent and not having to depend on others. That their loneliness that we have, that's not, it's a known thing, right? People are growing old and lonely.
Hmm.
And in Europe, you could still see people interacting day to day, every single day with one another in a way that we're just not doing.
Yeah, I think we touched on this in a previous episode, but I think the family tradition, another tradition, right? I mean, in Italy, I'm sure that it's still the case. You'll often see one household with three, maybe even four generations of
Yeah,
people living in the house, and we don't do that anymore, but we used to.
yeah,
When I grew up in Boston in the 60s and 70s, and we had, the North End was all Italians,
yeah,
and it was, if you didn't know you were in Boston, you'd thought you were in Italy.
yeah,
The infrastructure, the smells, the language being spoken, and there's families on top of families, on a grandma, great grandma,
yeah.
uncle this, aunt that. I mean, that's kind of cool, and we haven't done that over here in a long time. And the same thing was with the Irish down in South Boston.
Part of that,
It was,
that they were also first, second generation
yep,
immigrants.
yep, yep. They
So
were hanging on to their own traditions from the homeland. Yeah, yeah,
and yeah, and also very excited to have these new opportunities here in America,
yep,
and we're starting those businesses and creating that. So
yep.
a lot of this is success. It just success as in financial success, but it doesn't bring maybe other forms of success like social success, social interaction.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that money doesn't buy happiness, the old cliche. Well, it
Yeah,
clearly doesn't. That
yeah.
money creates opportunities, but it also creates challenges,
It
unique
creates
challenges.
isolation.
It creates isolation. It creates laziness.
Yep.
It creates what's the word, complacency.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would, if I had the opportunity or do have the opportunity to be quote unquote successful monetarily, as you have as well, would I choose not to do that because of those issues? Probably not.
Yeah.
I think what I try to do the older I get is lighten up about everything. Just consistently show up every day, as we talk about pretty often, and just but lighten up about it. It's
Yeah.
like, you know what it's like to have a lot of money. Like, that doesn't change how you feel emotionally, your relationships, who you socialize with. It doesn't change any of that stuff, or it shouldn't.
Yeah.
But it's certainly easy
I
to
have
fall
a
into that
question for you,
trap.
Mark. In terms of, because I don't know that much about the European political system, but my understanding is that they have multiple parties, unlike the U.S., where we really have two parties, right? We have red and we have blue. So I'm wondering how much that benefits them politically. We're very divided. You know, we're to the point now where we're separating friends based on your political party, whether you like it or not. I found that very saddening.
You know,
Even family members to some degree.
I
But do you?
hear those stories. I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with that, and I think that's another media issue. I think that I don't have enough knowledge about the different types of government and leadership in Europe to be able to speak to that. Which probably makes me an ignorant American. That's another
Yeah, it
topic
does.
about this.
Yeah. Well, they
But
have more. They have more than one, more than two parties. They have
some
multiple
do, yeah,
parties.
some
Yeah.
do, yeah. And but I don't know whether that third party is has any efficacy at all. Maybe they have it and it's not. It's still a two-party
What,
thing. It just looks like three. I don't know. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
yeah, yeah. What I think it does, I think it does. It dilutes the conflicts. It dilutes the division when you have other places you can go. And I don't want to start that boring conversation. Is we need a third party, but we do need a third party. We need a
Well,
third option because I think most of us reside in the middle somewhere, and we just keep getting divided and divided
I just,
by
yeah,
politicians and media. So
yeah, and then but and we're letting that happen, right? People are, people are not speaking up. I speak to a lot of people that are, they're pretty complacent, and their position is more perhaps aligns with mine or and yours, which is, I'll speak for myself. I lean to the right, but I also, every time I say that, whether I'm answering a question or not, I go, no, I think I'm just practical. I think things have to make sense for me. And I think everyone should, I think too many of us, maybe all over the world, some person with a microphone and a suit and tie on with a title of authority says something and we just accept it. Right. And it's like, how about stepping back and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense, or I need more information, or what's the context behind what you're saying? So I would tend to believe less of that goes on in Europe, and much more of it goes on over here. So
yeah,
the world, like I said, the world I live in it's a pretty nice place, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So
yes. I think the other observation was there's we're American that consists of 50 states. Even though Europe, they're Europeans.
mhm.
But that is. If I was trying to explain to somebody that doesn't understand the difference, like it's kind of like talking about, I can talk about my brother and my sister, but you can't.
Mhm.
It's one of those things, right?
Yep.
So, but
Yep.
but they are European as one. They're European, and then they have obviously they're different countries that they're from.
Mhm.
But it's pretty remarkable how they do have figured out to get along well enough to create a functioning society that they're constantly either through transportation, through currencies, through politics, through a lot of things. They have to get along, and
Yep.
they've been and there's been many times when they haven't, and many people died over time. I think there's something to say for that history
Yep.
and their effort to work and to embrace the differences among each other, cultural, language, and so on. They've
Yeah.
done a pretty good job
Yeah, I think
overall.
the coolest example of that that pops into my mind is what recently took place, I think, in Italy, was the Ryder Cup, the
Mm.
golf tournament where the United States plays against Europe. And you know who Europe is? Everyone except the United States.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but yeah, I think that speaks for it. And same with
Yeah.
like right now the Rugby World Cup. We went to the Scotland versus Ireland match, and Ireland's the number one team in the world right now, and they destroyed Scotland. But everybody now is getting I want France to win. Unlikely they'll make it, but they're up there. It's a good chance. But everybody wants a European team to win this year, to knock
Mhm.
off the South Africans or the New Zealand. That would be the only other possibility. So
Yeah.
it's fun. It's fun to see that uh, people. And when I was trying to explain the difference between rugby and say American football, which I played both, um, is that there's a big difference between in America. Sure, you're playing football for your team, your high school, your city, your college, whatever. Um, but the game always comes first, and the player comes second. It seems like a lot of American sports, the player comes first, the game comes second. But
Mhm.
there's one other level that rugby has, because it's an international sport like soccer, is that your ultimate goal is to represent your country someday.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and even though you'll play professionally, you'll every 4 years you'll go back to your country of you were born, or your grandparents, or where you're from, heritage, and then to represent your country. And there's no greater honor. So even though some teams are much better than others in a dramatic way, uh, just winning a rugby game, like Portugal won their first rugby game in World Cup history. Those guys were in tears. It was a huge
Yeah.
victory, and everybody was happy to see how excited they were able to squeak out a win, right? And,
Yeah.
and it was that was a lot of fun. But that's the European spirit. So it
Yeah.
also shows you
Is
the
it
importance of sports. Yeah.
I think what seems to be the case is that a lot of what we're talking about is the differences in tradition,
Yes.
the preservation of tradition
Yeah.
versus the elimination of tradition
Yeah.
under the auspices of, well, those people were slave owners or whatever. Let's take
Yeah.
down these statues. I don't think that stuff's going on in Europe. You know,
No, 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 not at all. If anything,
yeah,
that's interesting you say that. You're right. It's kind of sad that in the US
it
somehow we're,
is.
we're going to rewrite history by tearing it down because it represented something. Well, of course, everything represents everything. We should represent the progress we've made, not to destroy the past and then try to rewrite it the way that the person in power gets to. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
and
I'm
and
glad.
you
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm also glad that we don't need to run with that either, right? That's I think it speaks for itself.
No, I think it's to me it's less political and it's more traditional. It's family values. It's the ease with which we can live with one another, with
Mhm.
ourselves,
Mhm.
and forgiveness, right? It's like
Yeah.
we can't be living today based on something somebody did 200 years ago. We
Yeah.
just can't. It doesn't matter what the topic is. We just can't. And
Yeah.
I think that
You think about this one, Mark, on and again, I don't want to go into historical facts because they're a little bit fuzzy for me, but I do know over the years, like the conflict that even Ireland had with Britain, right? There was a lot of conflict, and now they get along, and I'm sure there's some resentment left, but you got to hand it for Europe for getting through some of those periods, and there
yeah.
were some dark periods.
Yeah, no, I was directly connected to that because I got married, I think in '88, and the
Oh, interesting.
Troubles to an Irish girl, and the Troubles were
Yeah,
still.
just share that with me if you could. Just a quick perspective on that. I was playing rugby with guys at that time that were coming over because of that conflict, but share that. But I think that's a good example of how everybody, you fast forward 20, 30 years later, and it hasn't been forgotten, but they move on and they're getting along, and it,
I just remember it being really, really violent for a long time,
yeah,
and like really, really divided. Like you were a Northern Irelander or you
yeah,
were from Ireland, and you were Catholic or you were Protestant, and it's
mhm,
and it's like innocent lives were lost with bombs
mhm,
going off, and it was unsafe. Belfast was unsafe.
mhm. But
And
it
then
was a religious war, right?
yep, yep, in part, but it was also very prideful. It was very prideful, and then the British. To this day, I believe, if you look at Northern Ireland, the top little slice of it is still considered Great Britain.
Hmm.
And so I'm not a historical buff or anything like that, but then I remember all of a sudden it wasn't that way anymore. You could
Yeah.
go to Belfast and have a good time, and I don't know whether that took 50 years or 20 years or 30 years. I honestly
Mhm,
don't know, because I wasn't when I was younger. I wasn't as
mhm,
conscious of politics. I wasn't as conscious of world
mhm.
world events, and I was living a more self-centered,
Mhm.
selfish
Did the
young
US have
man's
anything to do
life.
with that? Did the US get involved in that or help?
They
try
got
to
involved
resolve.
politically. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we got a lot of Irish people over here, a lot of
Oh, of
Irish
course.
politicians that are
Yeah.
still connected to family and loved ones over there. So yeah, we influenced that politically. I don't know. We never got involved in it physically or
Oh, I know that. Yeah, we militarily we
combatively.
didn't get involved, but it did work out. I'm just thinking about it because of what's going on right now in Israel,
Yeah.
and will they ever get to a point where they can coexist? And it doesn't look that way. It really looks like there's two. It's a different situation, and
It depends on it, and this is my humble opinion. Okay, I'm not a politician and I'm not a military strategist, but I think what I've seen and it's brought me more deeply into globalization and the concept of that and the world's reaction to this. And if you go into pick the top 5 democratic run cities in this country, you have pro-Palestinian protests going on where they're saying F the Jews and putting signs up in the air. And it's like, you
that's
know,
not good. No.
that's it. Well, it's an ignorant thing to, and there are people in Congress that are supporting Palestine in this particular thing. And here's where it falls down. And we do this with everything. It's like the Palestinian leadership are bad people. All right. Hamas, Hezbollah are terrorist groups, but there's a Palestinian population that are good people. They just happen to be living in Palestine. I would liken it to the same that we'd say about the Chinese government versus the Chinese people, right? That's a really distinct separation, I think. And so we're not, if you're pro-Israel, which I am, right? I'm not Jewish, but I'm pro-Israel. There's so many fascinating and wonderful things about the Israeli, the country of Israel and how capable they are and the Jewish people. But then you have to look at this and say, no, these guys, these are evil people that have instigated this attack because they're killing kids and raping women and they're doing lighting people on. I mean, it's crazy, crazy shit, right? So, in my opinion, how do you deal with that? Well, there's only one way. There's only 2 things that you can do. You can give in and lose everything, right? Not have a country anymore, or you can ratchet it up a notch and smash the shit out of those guys. And what the Israelis seem to be doing, because their military is very proficient, special forces, Mossad, all that stuff, they got their shit together, is they go over there apparently, I don't know if they do it with drones or planes, but before they bomb a hospital with a bunch of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders in there hiding behind kids and sick people, they drop flyers and say, you got 24 hours, get the hell out of there because we're going to torch that place tomorrow. So they're not initiating, they're not purposefully involving innocent people. Innocent people will probably get killed as collateral damage.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible not to do that in any kind of war. But we're playing this game of compassion for the Palestinian people. I don't think Israel has anything against the Palestinian people. I'm almost positive that's the case.
Yeah.
It's the leadership of the country who are cowards and the people that are in these terrorist organizations that are not peaceful protesters. They're terrorists. So anyway,
Well, let's bring it back. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a lot of propaganda, right? So we don't really know. Nobody really knows what's going on.
I've never seen a military altercation have so much impact on a social media site like LinkedIn, which isn't about this at all. I mean, and a lot of Jewish people are speaking up and saying a lot of things. So I've seen a lot, and just in the last few days.
Yeah, but getting back to the show again, we're talking. I think it's related to the worldview because politics is part of the worldview, right? This is part of it's traditions and so on. It's just that it's not going to get resolved today. That's for certain.
No, I think everybody wants it to get resolved as soon as possible. And to your point, I don't have military insight into what's going on. I don't have political insight. My information comes from smart people that I trust and a media that I choose. And so it's a cluster. It's a cluster. But yeah, I mean, it's in terms of traveling over there and feeling safe. I can't imagine anybody feels safe in that particular region of the world right now. But
yeah, we take that for granted for sure. But yeah, overall, if I was to wrap up the truth, I think the other we mentioned was people. So what has changed? It could be as much. I changed a lot since the last. I was there during our honeymoon, and that was 30 something years ago. So what the world's changed a lot in that time period, but I've also changed.
Yep.
And I think when you travel, part of it is you have to respect and kind of, there's a lot of things that are different. And if you're not really into that and you're not willing to embrace that, and you're obviously grateful, being very grateful, then you're going to have a bad experience because you can't go to a different country and expect them to do things the way that you expect them done to be
Yeah,
done.
you brought up McDonald's earlier, and I even when I was over there, way long ago, there were McDonald's there in Paris in particular, for example. And it always astounded me when I saw Americans in Paris eating at McDonald's.
Yeah, I won't
And
do
I'm
it.
like, I just
Same
don't
with the
understand.
Starbucks. I don't get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't get it at all.
yeah,
It's like, I
yeah,
want to experience Italy. I
yeah.
want to experience Nice. I want to experience Paris,
But at the same time, the McDonald's provides a product and a different experience. So it's not as I don't want to knock McDonald's for being there. People liked to go to McDonald's in whether I was in Milan or in Paris because they know they can get a hamburger quickly, which you
Mhm.
can't get if you go anywhere else. You're going to sit down and wait. That's
Yeah.
the way it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're going to get a consistent. That's what McDonald's is. So there was more American companies than you would expect for a reason, because
Yeah.
clearly the Europeans appreciate that. They appreciate that consistency. Now, are they dominating? No, but it just goes to show
Yeah, they
there's
seem to have arrived at a good balance between capitalism and cultural traditions. I
yeah,
remember, even though it was long ago, one of the things I made my college roommate who I traveled with and me do is we get into a city, any city, and we look to see what the public transportation system was. Was it buses? Was it trains? Whatever. Like in
yeah,
Paris, got the metro, right? It's a pretty efficient thing. And we would take a map out. That's how long ago it was. and and we would pick the farthest town away, the last stop on the train or the last
mhm,
stop on the bus, and we just go all the way there. And where you would end up would always be the most culturally rich
yeah,
place that you could possibly find in that particular country, close to the city. And those experiences were phenomenal.
they were
I
the
mean,
unknown too, right? The
oh,
unknown and
totally,
what to
totally
expect.
unknown. But
Yeah,
I mean, we ended up in Germany and in France and in Italy, in places where they're not on anybody's map. They're not
yeah,
in Fodor's travel guide. And you genuine food, hospitality out the wazoo, and they
yeah,
just loved talking to Americans, just like asking questions about America, and we'd ask
yeah.
them questions about it. I'm beaming just remembering. It also was an experience we had in Amsterdam, which you said you enjoyed a couple of times. And there's people in Amsterdam from everywhere,
Yeah, Amsterdam is like that. I'll share one last story and we'll wrap up because we're coming short on time. But I think last time we did the podcast, I was in Zurich, yeah, or
Yeah, I think so.
I was in Milan.
Milan, you were in Milan. We talked about
I was
graffiti. I
on my way
remember
to
that.
Zurich. So from Zurich, we drove to this town in Zonico, which is uh, my grandmother before she passed away, gave me this family photograph, and a letter in Italian saying, who you were and this and that. And I had used this like 15 years ago when I was there once before and ended up connecting with some family members. So I didn't know for sure I know for sure that my grandmother's cousin would no longer be alive because she was older. She had died. There's no question. But this time, kind of the same way, we pulled in. But yeah, I was spending the night there. And this is way up in the deep Swiss Alps, right above Lake Como.
Oh yeah.
And so we pull in, we check in, we had a place there, and the next, oh, that's right, I went to the only restaurant in town, and this is like, when I say deep in the Swiss Alps, so you go back and forth 6 times just to get into there, and sometimes you have to back the car up because the roads are so windy.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up somebody found out we were in town, and we went back there for breakfast, and she said, "Oh yeah, you're Bonfantini's the family name." She says, "They were looking for you. They were looking for you." So I said, "Okay, well, what there's not addresses because it's a small town. What number?" So we knock on the door and then connected with my cousin, blood relative. So it was cool.
Nice.
Took some pictures, and then yeah, it was her sister. I'd met her sister last time I was there, and then that was visited the cemetery, so you see the family names, and then we're off on the trip. So it was cool. I got to set some family connection to reconnect with, and
Yeah,
makes it special.
and I'll close out with this. That's an experience that I'm looking forward to. And my
Yeah.
family, my dad's side of the family, English, Irish,
Are
they
they
went,
still there? Yeah.
no, they went to, there's some relatives, there's some graveyards in Ireland and in England that have Aylwards in them, but those are generations ago. My father's most recent experience, probably 15, 20 years ago, they went over from Ireland and England to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, up in the Canadian area there on the
Oh, I
water,
see. So you're
fishermen. And when my father and my brother did too, when they went there, you drop the name Aylward up there, and you're sitting down at somebody's dinner table like
yeah,
in a matter of minutes.
that's
And
well said. Yeah, it's kind of the same
yeah,
thing. Yeah,
and I want to go up there. My
you should do
girlfriend and I
that.
have been talking about going up there because that's as you discovered, because when you said that story,
Yeah,
you were beaming, you were smiling
yeah,
from ear to
yeah.
ear.
It's cool. The only difference that she spoke Italian only, so I couldn't. We couldn't translate. It was all emotion. We got
No
pictures, of
kidding.
course, hugging and
Oh,
kissing. But
that's so awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it sounds like a
All
great
right.
trip,
Yeah, it
and
was a good trip, good experience. Yeah,
welcome home. And I guess
yeah.
we'll wrap this one up, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds good, Mark. All
Thanks,
right.
Jim.
Talk to you next week.